Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Michael Levi. Michael Levi is professor at the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University. He has a strong international reputation for excellence in both fundamental and policy-oriented research on money laundering, corruption, cybercrimes, fraud, transnational organised crime and white-collar crimes. Michael Levi received different major lifetime achievement awards, among others from the British Society of Criminology and the American Society of Criminology, and was organizer of the ESC conference in 2017. This interview was conducted on 21st of February 2023.
Welcome, Michael Levi, to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast.
Welcome, Michael Levi, to our podcast. We are honored to have you here for a conversation on criminology.
So we will simply start with this conversation, asking you the question that we use to break the ice, and which would be, how is criminology defined? And then we have a problem, because which would be your country, the United Kingdom, Wales, your country of birth? We will let you tell us.
Well, I was born in England. I have lived and worked since 1975 in Wales. Technically, we're part of the United Kingdom, or as it is more commonly known nowadays, the disunited kingdom. So wherever you are in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, you belong to the same overall jurisdiction, though Scotland has its own legal system, always had its own legal system, which preceded the union with England. And Wales is a principality. It doesn't have its own legal system. Northern Ireland does have its own legal system, but it's very similar to England and Wales. So when I talk about my country, I am generally speaking about the UK, because as a social science, to the extent that it's a social science, criminology often disregards or is even ignorant of these legal jurisdictional issues, because insofar as it's about the explanation of criminal behavior, it probably it's relatively jurisdiction free, though personally as a comparativist, I think that variations are what we ought to look at for inspiration far more than we actually do in practice. The criminology definition might be, if you go back to Sutherland and Cressy, criminology is the study of the processes of making laws, of breaking laws, and society's reaction towards the breaking of laws, which is the definitional approach I would favor. Most criminologists, unless they're dealing with a hot topic like trans or drugs, forget about the problematic definition of things as criminal or not. People who are interested in labeling look a lot at society's reaction towards the breaking of laws, but many criminologists ignore that too. So given that there are so many criminologists and so many places that teach criminology in the UK, I would say there is no coherent worldview or Weltanschauung about what criminology is, or how it should be taught, or what its boundaries are. Indeed, some of the most prominent thinkers, for example, Stan Cohen, the late Stan Cohen, profess themselves to be anti-criminologists. These are contested spaces.
Okay, and especially because you mentioned that you've been living and working in Wales since 75. Do you think that during that time, the question should be how the study of criminology changed during that time? Because you have been a witness in the first row since the beginning.
Look, when I was appointed in 1975, there were 2 criminology posts in the whole of the UK, and 1 research fellowship, a 3-year Home Office funded research fellowship, for which I applied and wasn't even shortlisted. I regard that perhaps as a matter of pride, because my proposal for this 3-year study in 1975 was a study of the constitutional arrangements in the Crown dependencies, that's Jersey, Guernsey, and the Isle of Man, and their implications for financial crime, which I would say was somewhat ahead of the game. I wasn't shortlisted. Joanna Chaplin, in fact, was appointed to that post and did one of the first of her many studies of victims. I was one of 2 people appointed to criminology lectureships in 1975, the other one being Reading. That was probably more posts than there were in the following 5 years.
Wow.
So if I had not got a lectureship, I would have either had to be a contract researcher, as some people, for example, at Oxford and at Cambridge were for many years. Mike Maguire, my colleague, later came to Cardiff, was 14 years a short-term research associate. So that was the world of criminology. You either got one of these very, very rare lectureships, or you became a jobbing researcher, working on projects. Some of them you may have thought of, others were what other people did, or you went to work for the Home Office, or you did whatever you did outside of that framework. So that's a huge difference from today, where we have 135 universities offering 822 courses in criminology. So this massive expansion, what happened, if we talk about the profession of criminology, which may be different from the content of criminology, if we talk about the profession of criminology, then it was still a very rare post. There weren't many universities. I think at that time, the only universities that really taught much criminology were Cambridge, first amongst equals, the Sheffield, Keele, from which Howard Jones, who was the professor when I was appointed in Cardiff, here and Cardiff, were really the only places that taught criminology to any significant degree, and Edinburgh in Scotland.
Wow. And what happened to, or is there any plausible explanation of this explosion in 50 years?
Well, I think, yeah, people became more bothered about crime. Crime became a kind of socio-political and scientific issue. So that's part of it. That would be the, if you like, the respectable rationale. People wanted some answers. It became a chic subject, no doubt due to my involvement. It became a chic issue to study the rise of TV documentaries and thrillers, series like Cracker with the late Robbie Coltrane, the CSI, all of these things made criminal. There are two elements. There's a kind of research and thinking bit of criminology, where criminologists are asked to or volunteer to better explain and perhaps better control. It's an arguable point. Crime, and there's the student subject bit of criminology, which is generated partly by fashion. Criminology is something that you can say to your mates, "Oh, I'm studying criminology." Oh, that's cool. That to their parents, it's more respectable than sociology. It's not as respectable as law, but it sounds more interesting. So when I started criminology, for example, at Cambridge, in 1971, when I went as a student on the then diploma in criminology, because it wasn't worth a master's because it was too new and wasn't really a respectable subject. Criminology was very often taught as the most interesting and bit of a law degree. So you could actually get marks for doing something interesting. It was regarded as almost as sort of finishing school element of a law degree, where people got to do something interesting. They learned something a little bit more about the criminal justice system and sentencing and stuff like that. Capital punishment had still not been really knocked off the map, and still students like to study capital punishment in many countries. But there's a kind of popular culture aspect of studying criminology. It sounds as though you're doing something that serious and analytical, and of course plenty of other subjects at university, one would hope, are serious and analytical too. But criminology, it sounds as though it's doing some serious work for or against the state.
Yeah. If you go to the States, they usually blame also Nixon, who started the debate that was later used almost in the same words by Trump. But in Europe, I have the impression that it was a little bit later, and even it was the Labour Party who started with this tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, or maybe already Thatcher started with this kind of argument. I really don't know.
Well, I don't have a genealogy of the development of criminology as a subject in the UK. But in spite of the fact that crime, other than cybercrime, as we know, and non-cyber fraud, crime in general has been falling. It doesn't seem to have reduced the popularity of studying criminology. And in a way, you have to say, well, all subjects, what do people do with them? There certainly aren't enough jobs to employ people as professional criminologists at the end of their undergraduate degree or the 150 criminology master's degrees that there are. And I couldn't really tell you what the destinations of most of those. But if you do something that sharpens up your mind, motivates you to be interested in the subject, then isn't that enough, except for those technical areas that you can actually use for jobs?
Yes, but we must also say that because you mentioned the diploma, but first you did other studies, and you explained to me once it was a very good combination of branches.
Yeah, I mean, I started at Oxford doing philosophy, politics, and economics, which is what most of the prime ministers that we've had, I'm not saying this is a good thing, have studied, with the exception of Boris Johnson, who did classics. But most people have done PPE, which is different from personal protection equipment. It's philosophy, politics, and economics, which have become used to the phrase in English during COVID. Then I was sort of thinking about, what should I do next? Oh no, I don't really want to have to get a job. I should do postgraduate work, and I was thinking about doing sociology, which I'd studied a little of in my first degree, though it wasn't respectable enough for Oxford to give it kind of full equivalent status, and I just hit on, well, why don't I do criminology? And I was actually a late applicant for Cambridge, and Roger Hood, who interviewed me, stretched they normally only accepted 16 people, and they stretched it to 17 to accommodate me. So, I mean, on such minor things was my life changed, but there you are. So it turned out to be quite good, particularly for somebody like me who developed my interest in economic crime, because both philosophy, politics, and economics were all useful. I was not the most diligent undergraduate student, but enough remnants remained for me to make use of, and I did specialist courses in the politics of Western Europe. I remember my politics tutor for some subjects writing an essay on the Oder-Neisse line in red biro, which was all I had available, and he said, "I hope that doesn't mark the political tenor of your essay." Anyway, it turned out to be a useful, but criminology in those days, my fellow students at Cambridge came from law, sociology, psychology, medicine, politics, and that was probably probably the majority had law degrees.
And that I wonder often if it is a good idea to have an undergraduate program in criminology, because then you lose all this diversity that you are mentioning.
Well, yes, I mean that's an arguable point, but most of my fellow criminology staff would be unemployed if that was the case. So, but so we got to look at the basic kind of, if you like, economics of staff as well as student recruitment, so criminology would be a much smaller subject. It would still be bigger than it was when I started, but who knows, I might have been a multimillionaire offshore asset banker, but I'm still working at my advanced age because I'm interested in it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I see the point. I'm not sure that all the programs have this possibility of knowing something of philosophy. You could do an undergrad, but add a few classes that are related to what you mentioned: economy, politics, philosophy. When I look at the programs, I'm not sure that there are a lot.
I agree. I think that's a rather profound observation, and I think it's rather sad. There's no correlation between research prestige and the popularity of places to do criminology. So it's a rather odd situation. So yeah, people don't get very much analytical training. That it varies how much pure criminology, whatever pure criminology is, they do. In my own university, for reasons I won't go into, we don't have as many criminology courses as we might like, but but many students in sociology too are astonishingly ignorant of economics and of philosophy. So that's a case for maintaining it as a graduate discipline, but the world would be very different, and I would figure that if you did it that way, the vast majority of criminology staff in the UK would be unemployed.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, there is a general trend towards hyper specialization in all the branches, and I'm not sure that this, but I see the point that you make. The problem, in my opinion, is that sometimes, as you mentioned, there is such a wide diversity, even with the definition of criminology to start with, that you could put in the same table people from different universities, and I wonder, apart from the basic theories, which are the things that they have in common? I know it's not a problem only of criminology. In economy, you get the Nobel Prize that says A, and then and also a Nobel Prize that says minus A, exactly the opposite, and they both get the Nobel Prize. So it depends on the university; it may change. But I wonder which is which is our common ground, the things that we have for sure.
Yeah, I think the common ground is very hard to find. If you look at a lot of, say, the subjects that people are talking about, say at the British Society of the British Criminology Conference, a lot of them may be on LGBTQI stuff, on trans stuff, on green stuff. We might not agree about how core or non-core those are, but there's a lot of self-determination in what, I mean, degrees go through an external validation process, but there is no commonly agreed core of stuff, and the old methods of courses, which I used to teach when I started. I mean, when I started, there were 2 staff and a part-time and a professor who was part-time in criminology, was also in social policy and social work. The largest undergraduate course in the Department of Social Administration, and also a master's course. So that was 2 people. Sometimes we had 3, and that was still like the 3rd largest group in the UK. Yeah, I mean, what is core and what is not? I mean, a lot of the time people, pursue their own agendas for what they think is interesting and important, and they have nothing in common. So you can't assume that people have studied many of the core things. I mean, I couldn't tell you what most places are doing.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I mean, I'm just comparing the situation to Belgium, where we also have, of course, different universities, different programs, but there is this kind of tungus communis. I mean, the common elements are visible in each and every university, and then, of course, professors have their specializations, which can be seen in optional courses, but we try to, of course, we're a smaller country, we have less institutions, but we still try to have our students follow the same red thread, basic courses. I mean, I think it has advantages and disadvantages if we have so many programs, but maybe the differentiation also has to do something with where it is being taught. If I'm right, criminology in the UK is being taught at so many levels. I mean, undergraduate, but also with regard to social work, it can be some kind of minor course, which is not the case in Belgium. Maybe that's the reason why there is such a huge diversity in kind of programs, or am I wrong here?
There is no real centralized control, and it's so big that this, if you like, post-modernity fracturing can happen quite easily. Now, yeah, I expect there are things that are in common in most departments, but the extent to which people feel an obligation to teach what used to be the kind of core things, there is no control over. So you'd have to do a research study of your own, which is not my personal area of interest, to find out what they show. I mean, there are common standards and there are common metrics which the British Society of Criminology has been kind of pushing. So I maybe unintentionally exaggerated the fractured postmodern nature of this process, but there's no obligation to follow that, and it's taught in so many ways. There's no central authority that is dictating, and there isn't enough communality, as in the Belgian case. I mean, as you know, Lieven, I was on the committee that inspected the University of Ghent, and very good it was. I mean, we have an increasingly active office of student that looks at student satisfaction and adequacy and a whole range of factors, but they don't look at content in the same way. They're looking to reduce discontent, perhaps. And there's the research excellence framework, which because it evaluates our research and publishing work, but in this issue about the standardization of common curriculum, there isn't much. I mean, people look at other institutions and they maybe copy them, and there may be an element in some places of, well, I don't know very much about that, so I won't teach it. If one were honest about it, which affects some places rather than others. Whereas, for example, when I started, I just had a sense of obligation. What is the core bit of a criminological curriculum? This is what we've got to cover. I'm not sure that sense of belief in a common essence of the subject exists anymore, and that may be even the side effect of the revolution in criminology that happened in the mid-70s.
Okay, so you mean because of rather epistemological and philosophical discussions that there is no longer any strong sense of community or higher levels of diversity? People teach what they prefer to teach. Can also be a consequence of the hyper specialization, that people just teach their own specialities, or levels of courses which they have mastered. I mean, if you look at the future of criminology, the hyper specialization, you cannot even speak of sociological or psychological criminology without defining 20 subdivisions or subfields. So it's indeed, I think it's a huge challenge, and I don't really see easy solution with regard to educational programs, but it's an interesting discussion, an interesting topic anyhow.
Yeah, I think it preceded the hyper specialization. I think it related to the Lebensraum that that Taylor, Walton, and Young caused with the new criminology and critical criminology, to overthrow the certainties of the old guard. I mean, the old guard thought they had an idea of what criminology was, and it was about studying the causes of crime, and the radical movement which led to also to the growth of criminology, or coincided with it, rather, particularly in sociology departments, less in law departments. So one of that fissures was to focus attention on the problematic nature of lawmaking, the problematic nature of law enforcement, and the problematic nature of labeling people as criminals. And so once you start from that position, well, you've got a finite amount of time. What is it that you're going to study? Do you study the social construction of crime and the social construction of punishment? Or do you actually, try and explain why people commit offenses, which offenses, I would add, how do their criminal careers develop, which of course you can do in an interactive way, because you don't need whatever routine activities theory is or claims to be. It certainly forces people to look at crime in its interaction with social control as well as legal control. Yeah, people have a different spin on all of those. Obviously, if you're looking at serial killers, then the temptation is, unless you're doing a kind of media exercise, to look at something gone wrong in their genes or their family relationships. But of course, if you're looking at fraudsters, as I do, then do you do the same, or is it something a bit different? So it depends what aspects of crime. A lot of people who've been appointed nowadays are activists, and they see activism as being part of their role. So some of the older generation, I'm talking about my generation, some of the older generation may have seen themselves as activists, but we're now passé. So I think there are different sort of generations of people and different level. Given the amount of criminology in the UK, it would probably be a mistake to expect them to be, or to state that they were all research active. People, the teaching loads are quite high. People are expected, I know it's more disciplined in continental Europe, but people are expected to spend a lot of time teaching, marking, etc. And so it's in some respects it's more like a Hochschule than it is a university, as in the kind of people who get to our level think of what we do. So it would be extraordinary if the number of staff, I don't know how many people teach criminology, but there's a lot of places, we're all active researchers. What would we all do?
At the same time, this huge diversity, and of course the UK is the place where you have, well, also Belgium and the Netherlands have a lot of criminologists, but if you look at the numbers of people attending conferences of the European Society, for example, the UK still has the largest number. I don't have the impression that there is debate among all these different ways of doing criminology. I have more the impression that everyone is working on her or his side, and there is not a lot of confrontation. Lieven had a nice article on a debate about developmental criminology and biological issues, but even that, it is not something that that made the headlines. I have had some discussions, especially with colleagues from the Spanish-speaking world, but I don't see a lot of debate. I wonder in the 70s when it started. In the conferences, of course, I understand that they were a smaller conference. Was there really a debate there?
Yeah. Things used to be much more active. I mean, if you think about the history of this, and I'm possibly the oldest actively practicing criminologist from that era. So I remember in 1973, when I went to the National Deviancy Conference, as well as the Cambridge Criminology Conference, there was a lot more debate about the limits of what we were studying and what the focus should be. There was a lot more normative debate about what was the correct way of taking into these accounts. In fact, I remember being on the train on the way to the Cambridge Criminology Conference, which was Radzinovitz's swan song as professor. Some people, I won't name them, but I know they're talking about of course, these young Turks. No offense meant to President Erdogan. They're these young Turks, and when they didn't recognize me, I was unimportant, still am. I said, "I'll have a young Turkish coffee, please." I said to them on the train. They looked rather startled. So there was more serious debate, and it was partly because the old guard were seen as doing not really Lombrosian, but taking for granted the unproblematic nature of the definitions of criminality, whereas the younger guys were saying, well, as Laurie Taylor memorably wrote in a book that has long since disappeared on deviance, that society was like a giant fruit machine, but nobody asked who put the machine in and who takes the profits. Which I think is a very powerful analogy for what people felt. Now, I wasn't in the vanguard of the new criminology. In fact, I remember you say about debates in conferences. I remember getting up. Jock Young was doing his talk on critical criminology and was advocating local community policing control. And I got up and I said, "You mean like Malcolm X, the Panthers?" I said, "How would homosexuals and Jews fare in such a local community control model? What about minority rights?" And this was viewed with some horror, I would say. But and I would still maintain the importance of that critique, because as I said, you can't assume that the majority of people whether in working class communities or middle class communities are going to be liberal and tolerant and hip like us. The majoritarianism is a threat. So that was an example. Now, it's true that I was the only person to get up and make that remark, which didn't endear me particularly, but tough. So but people did argue about that kind of thing, and of course, what Jock was saying was radically different from what any of the old Turks conventional criminologists would have been arguing. So this notion of, well, whose side are you on? And people used to have proper arguments about that and about the correctness of legal constructions of crime in ways that, maybe they're happening as much. I'm not in lots of places, but they don't happen very much in the criminology societies or the criminology conferences, and in a way that the large number of parallel sessions don't help, and that relates to Lieven's point about the hyper specialization. Some of the older criminologists who taught me, once said, well, I admire the way that you stick to these minority areas, Michael, like corruption, white collar crime, organized crime, money laundering. And he didn't mean it ironically, but I can't help feeling, well, as opposed to what, sentencing the motoring offender, or so this notion that there is partly a battle for the soul of what we do, and also those things that are easier to study and that you can apply complex methodologies to more readily than others.
It's a pity that this debate disappeared, but you were involved in a couple of them. I remember also an article that you published about who's been quoted. And this, I mean, it's a little bit lost, but it's a nice debate. Only that there are so many things published. But in an anthology, we could make an anthology of the debates. You played a role.
Yeah. So in 1993, when David Farrington and Ellen Cohn did the first of their "Who are the most influential English-speaking criminologists" articles, which, slightly to my surprise, that British Journal of Criminology published. So I wrote a spoof critique called "She's Giving Me Good Citations" to the tune of the Beach Boys. She's giving me good citations, which David Farrington found quite offensive. And critiquing, making the point, which I still immodestly think is correct, that our citations are a function of what are the modal things that people write about. The Kuhnian paradigm is one that is much debated, but clearly, if people are writing about juvenile delinquency and gangs and criminal careers of offenders that exclude white collar and corporate crimes, then they won't be citing me very much. So it was partly driven by egotism, but also by I think a correct sense that I was problematizing the concept of influence and suggesting, I think empirically rightly, that people often got cited because they would be the anonymous referees who would think you unscholarly if you didn't cite them, a view which David Farrington found horrifying, but was based on a modest and non-systematic sample of people that it's just common sense that power exists in journals. You have to make the right noises, but also if you're writing about minority stuff, you're very unlikely to change what everybody else is thinking. I mean, there are some people, Jock Young, David Garland, for example, who have, I think, radically transformed the way, or Stan Cohen, the way people think about things. But the rest of us probably haven't I don't see why people writing about juvenile crime should be using things that I've done, except perhaps to think about, if members of British elites get sent away to boarding school at a very young age and have cold, uncaring relationships with their parents, some of them may become king, some of them may become, captains of industry, wealthy landowners, in which context some of them may commit white-collar crimes. And that kind of childhood experience may have something to do with their behaviors. They may, or they may learn ruthless hypocrisy from. So in a way, by neglecting the area of white-collar crime, a lot of other areas of criminality lose something, but it's only a very minority, and they wouldn't be committing white-collar crime as juveniles. It would only be if you really did a particular form of life course criminology that you would that you might take that into account. Perhaps moving beyond crime, beyond convicted offenders into semiology or harm, or maybe they're running corporations that have been dealt with for infractions rather than for crime. So there's a lot of components to that. But that was, yes, I did play a part in, and sadly for me, I probably got more comments of approval from colleagues for that piece than I did for most other things that I've written, because it affected most people. So occasionally I do like to stir things up. It's true.
I know, and this is what is what I think is missing today, because the universities and the academia should be a place to debate ideas. But of course, you mentioned that the problem with activism is that usually activists think in terms of right and wrong. So they know what they think they know what is right for everyone, and then the rest is bad. And we are trying to think in terms of probably false or probably true. And these are two axes that do not match. But in any case, what you did there, well, the idea of the modes, at one moment everybody's talking about something, or even in the kind of analysis that are done. You must do this kind of analysis in this moment, and also the concept of influence. Influential, being quoted does not necessarily mean influential. But in any case, I miss this kind of debates. And probably, you were in several cases. When you started studying economic crime, you were quite alone. Not a lot of people were doing that kind of research.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And as it was not popular, for example, but you mentioned critical criminology. For example, the books in critical criminology were translated, for example, to Spanish, all of them, while other classic books were never translated, just because of usually affinities that doesn't have to do a lot with science, but more with use of the word, and this creates some confusion. Perhaps a good thing, there is this philosopher that created the channel, the School of Life. This British philosopher, the name will come immediately, and he has, in one place it has the curricula, and so it's the writers that you should know, the philosophers that you should know, and maybe one project for us to have for us would be to have a small curricula. Let's say the classic criminologists like you explaining one topic, and keep this in open access for anyone that wants to know exactly what at least they should know, I think. Also, I have another question. You started with economic crime when no one was there, and then you jumped into cybercrime also quite quickly. So you how did that happen?
Yeah, obviously I'm an analog criminologist. When I started, for 10 years after I started my PhD, computers did not exist. So I typed my 240,000 word PhD because nobody told me to stop. Yeah, they had the corrector ribbon. You had 3 lines to change something. Otherwise, you had to retype the page. And being intelligent, I waited until the end before I numbered the pages. And I had a stamp that numbered the page. Imagine having to do that now. It's barely conceivable. But I don't consider myself a real cyber expert. But I felt that how could you understand these criminal and social phenomena properly without trying to make sense of this extra dimension? To me, it wasn't kind of intellectually tenable, even though, if somebody asked me to develop a computer program to commit cybercrime or to prevent it, I wouldn't be able to do that. But it seemed to me that you had to understand a bit about the cyber world and the private sector as well as the public sector of cyber control reduction in order to make sense of the pattern of economic crime. So, imagine if today, you were trying to explain fraud and you excluded online fraud. You'd have a very weird pattern. I mean, there's an issue about, well, where does this end? Is all banking cyber-enabled crime? Because what kind? So you can run into analytical problems of that kind, but you have to take on board and also be able to assess to what extent it's a moral panic about cybercrime, which neglects other types of crime. So unless you try and master that, I mean, there are people around who are more technically gifted and more intelligent than I am, but that's okay. That's just the way things are. But I didn't feel that it was. So I think I first started looking at cyber stuff around 1999, and that was quite early. Writing about it and thinking about it, both as a media moral panic and also about how it affected the organization of criminality. And also, for that matter, I admitted, young people got involved in economic crimes who would not have been old enough to be engaged in offline economic crimes. So what difference does remoteness of the offender from the victim? I mean, when in the 1990s, I was writing about, Nigerian fraudsters sending 419 fraud letters, but they used to type out letters or write letters to people. I mean, that requires labor. I remember going to Nigeria and saying, well, you won't have your economic crime won't be easier until you have a more reliable electricity supply. Because during the vice president of Nigeria's speech, at the conference I was speaking, I was a kind of main speaker at, there have been 2 power failures. So, of course, fraudsters usually have their own generators. But it started out as letters. I mean, there were letters, and that required more labor than sending emails. So this has led to a fall in the number of people, probably, who are committing 419 fraud, because you can have more efficiency in fraud per person. So it's thinking about issues like that and how the technology spreads and alters the shape of criminality that I think is very interesting. And I continue to do work on online fraud as well as offline fraud. But I say I'm not putting myself up as a technical expert. Some criminologists are much better at this than me.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the technical aspect, I mean, for the analysis, of course, I can understand it. But I think that what is missing is a little bit the reflection. And I have heard editors of different journals complaining about the lack of theoretical developments, because now a lot of articles are very straightforward. This is my data. This is the background. This is the data. The methods, results, find and discussion, conclusion, and you don't get a context, a reflection that goes beyond what the data is showing. And I think since your first articles, you always gave a place to that. Although currently, I think that it's even more difficult to publish something in the let's say the mainstream journals. If there is a lot of reflection, I am not sure that this is easy to pass. I think it's easy to pass with a classic article than with the other one. But I don't know. Maybe what would you say is now the best way to promote ideas? The articles, or should we go back to books?
Yeah, books, blogs. You can probably get as much. I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I know there was an argument that the editors of the last Oxford Handbook of Criminology, who I admire greatly, put forward in the introduction to it. There's a new one coming out. There's always a new one coming out since I've been engaged. The first 3 Oxford handbooks, by the way, I wrote the violent crime chapters because I was fed up with being typecast. But I thought I had some interesting things to say about violent crime. But yeah, so I think we need to broaden our lenses. It is possible to write a big book as well as write articles. Although I have to say I'm rather slow myself in finishing. But but also if you blogs and other things, we do need to think about fora where this kind of active debate, like Lieven's own efforts, can happen. It's harder to do in a journal unless you set aside a place. I mean, Criminology and Criminal Justice, when I was editor, that's the British Society of Criminology's journal. We used to have a kind of critical debates section. I'm not sure it really worked that well, but it worked better than not having that. But eventually that, I think, faded out, or it lapsed.
I think, I don't see it any longer. I also, Michael Tonry, when he was editing the newsletter, he used sometimes to put people together to debate something. So maybe that's also a format. I realize that when you organize a round table, sometimes people are extremely polite, and so the discussion never arises. I saw Zizek with the Yuval Noah Harari, and it was extremely polite, and they reach agreements in everything. I saw him also debating with Zizek, with Jordan Peterson, and it was also soft. They didn't take extreme different positions. Everybody is very polite nowadays in these debates when they are in front of them, one in front of the other.
So maybe that's an argument for doing it online. I don't know. I'm not in such high circles, but it's interesting. Certainly when I was a student at Cambridge, nobody could accuse the late Dick Sparks, as opposed to Richard Sparks at Edinburgh, of being polite to anybody. And the tradition in philosophy, for example, is of quite vicious kind of seminars. So I'm not sure why people have suddenly become so polite. Maybe they think they will be if you like, punished by the audience if they are rude. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a lot you can do about that, except perhaps to give people almost a role of, you know, you advocate for this and you advocate against this. And yeah, so if you treat it like a kind of formal debating role or a party political debate or something, then people might be able to say to themselves, I'm just acting in role, I'm not really being nasty.
Yeah, this in the classes of rhetorics was a classic thing to do, to put people to defend one position. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, in the case I miss this kind of debates, but now that you mention it, the Oxford Handbook of Criminology is a good example of a basic curricula of criminology.
Yeah, and it's been expanding and widening and including lots of new things. The new one, which I have contributed to on both white collar crime and terrorism, we'll have even more. But on the one hand, as Lieven pointed out, there's the hyper specialization. So it's how many people writing about green crime are also doing anything about juvenile delinquency would be a question. Or how many people on corporate crime, likewise. These are, I would say, there are leitmotifs around some people, whether they are also relating to the institutions, because we all, but I think there's been a decline in people coming together in the same institution.
Because I think that's true. Yeah, I have the same impression. But isn't it so that everybody's just looking for an own niche to? I mean, that's probably one of the explanations that people who are into corporate crime do not study juvenile delinquency. I mean, not everybody can study the same subject, so people look for an own niche, and then they are like talking together. A new school emerges, and people discuss within schools, but no longer between schools. So that's two opposite evolutions going together.
Even in 1971, I would say that there wasn't that much harmony in the Institute of Criminology. But in those days, people had at least studied the court. It was easy to study the same things because there wasn't much else. Mm-hmm. Now we have, it's a bit like people write about the dilemmas of too much choice. In supermarkets, we have the same issue in criminology. I mean, how many handbooks?
Too many. Way too many.
I mean, I normally refuse, but the how many handbooks can you have? There's, economists would call this market failure. How do you decide which is the best handbook?
That's a very interesting issue you are raising now, because I have my course on criminology, and I mean, when I started, I used to read them all because I was curious to see the similarities and differences. I mean, I have the impression that sometimes, with regard to several theories, people don't even read the original articles, and so you see copies of ideas, and it's like, copying an idea after 100 copies, the theory has changed completely. So textbooks are becoming terrible. People should read the original stuff. I mean, I like original readers with the basic ideas from Lombroso to contemporary scholars, but read the originals and stop making so many handbooks.
Yes, but Lieven, without being too flattering, you're a serious scholar and thinker. Lots of people are just trying to kind of get a job done. And it's very difficult to avoid that. I mean, one of the reasons that I say no to most requests. How many times can you rechurn? I mean, without being too immodest, I'm reasonably notable in a range of areas. And so I often get asked, or some people deliberately avoid asking. But how many times do I want to write an overview of white-collar crime, or an overview of organized crime, or an overview of cybercrime, or an overview of money laundering? What else fresh can you say about subject? I mean, fortunately, all of those things are changing, but why would you want to keep writing an overview? So everything has an opportunity cost. And what we maybe lack, because there is so much stuff around, what we lack is kind of fresh approach, which you can often get by reading the originals, because you discover stuff in there that nobody is, it's refracted through a glass darkly. And as the Bible says, and now I see. But it's hard to refresh. And if you feel obliged to review everything, how much energy do you have left to say something fresh?
Exactly.
Yourself. At Oxford, we used to have to write an essay every 2 weeks, which you read out in front of your tutor and the one other person in the room.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was a pretty and we had, I can't remember what the topic was, but I hadn't done a great deal of reading, and my tutor said, well, yes, but I mean, Durkheim changed his line of argument. And thought, who the hell is Durkheim? So I felt glad. I mean, Durkheim had come to the same conclusion as I had. Sometimes, it's death to have to read everything in the field. It just becomes crunching.
I think the problem is it's very difficult to get generalists that can give an overview nowadays. Another thing that I think is interesting is we talk about how criminology changed, and if you think about the crime in your lifespan, you have always been studying specific kinds of crime, but in general, if you think of crime in the UK in the 70s when you were studying, and you think of crime today, apart from cybercrime, but do you see which are the changes that you would identify?
Well, some kind of crimes have been reduced mostly by situational crime prevention type methods. Car crime, theft of cars, for example, or by technological devices. It doesn't stop people stealing catalytic converters, which I see has been booming in America as well. So there may be some subcomponents of car crime that are growing as people move towards electric vehicles or whatever. Then there may be some things that they can steal bits of that have got a market value. So I think understanding those kind of changes in the organization of thieving, as Mary McIntosh in a wonderful little book on the organization of crime, 1975, much neglected, discussed, and 1971 at the National Deviancy conference. So changing the organization of thieving are interesting. Paul Ekblom referred to them as sort of arms race. Those kinds of things, those relate to particular, usually subsets of forms of crime. Obviously, domestic violence has rightly become, and I'm not just saying this for political correctness, has rightly become my government, as far as we have one. That is the UK government, not the Welsh government, has just made domestic violence a national security threat. And what will change as a result of that is an empirical question that is very interesting. But obviously it kills more people than terrorism does. But unlike terrorism, it's a much more distributed social threat. If I had my time, I would get people thinking about national security threats. They've also said that fraud is a national security issue. Some of my colleagues at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, and that seems to be taken on board by the government as well. So how many national security threats can we have, and what are the similarities and differences? Using my broad and being somewhat interested in the conceptual nature, what do we mean by a national security threat? It's a flexible labeling construct. People should be thinking more about that kind of thing. So there's a political process of inclusion, exclusion, and then there's the practical difference it makes to the way these things are controlled. That is something that we might reasonably be thinking about. If we think about the nature of crime, so a lot of drug crimes has been de facto decriminalized or depenalized, probably more accurate. But then they were in the 70s, really. But the amount of policing attention that drug crimes get is probably less. So the shape of drug crimes has altered. There's a lot more opportunities for hydroponics and we're not so dependent on international importation for some drugs as we are for others. Nature of police and criminal justice corruption, the interforce cooperation. Fraud has obviously come up. I mean, now 41% of recorded crime in computer misuse, likewise, the second equal in England and Wales, according to the crime survey for England and Wales. So gradually people have started recording. I advocated for this in the 90s, but nobody was listening. And then we would have had a better sense of the growth. But that's life. You try arguments and not everybody agrees. And if you don't have power, then. So fraud is up, car crime and theft from vehicles has gone down, maybe burglary again, particularly during COVID. Some kinds of crimes that require particular technologies have been going up. But the core staples, domestic violence as opposed to street violence, the public health approach to violence, it's maybe had some effect on reducing certain forms of street violence. Soccer gang delinquency was once, a kind of big issue. Now we look at it as the product of French policing behavior in the European Cup final and the lies that are told about the fans. So that would be almost a metaphor for new criminology, that we've changed the focus since Hillsborough, of skepticism about police accounts. Of course, it was unfortunate and no doubt a pure accident that all the CCTV was wiped around, for the European Cup final. I'm sure it was an accident. Some people might say differently. It's a question of how we interpret things. So the whole area around legitimacy and procedural legitimacy, which I think maybe is overcooked, but legitimacy, all these areas are much more debated than they were when I was a student. But if you're talking about, well, what has changed in crime, I think juvenile crime is sort of less obsessed about careers in kind of violence. Maybe haven't changed so much, but maybe due to interventions in domestic violence have altered, though still very common. If we think about property crimes, though, certainly, fraud, computer crimes, ransomware. Ransomware now is classified as a tier 1 national security threat in the UK. and rightly, in my opinion. I don't think the changes have been that dramatic, but the way people kind of write and talk and the media programs about them, even money laundering, which was very, very niche when I started my research in 1988, is now in popular television programs, on streaming, etc. So I think the depth of field of crime, if I had to make a comment, is now more thought about. I've just attended talk about the transatlantic moves against illicit finance, and the implications for different kinds of crimes. That's still very niche for criminology, but in the world, much more significant. You cannot open a bank account without, doing a lot more things than you used to do.
In Switzerland, for example, the problem is that the stereotypes are still there, but nowadays it would be extremely difficult for a non-resident to open a bank account. It's interesting when you mention drugs. When you think about it, you remember the huge scandal because they found a plant of marijuana in Paul McCartney's house, and then Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are going to jail. And I remember in one of the 100 documentaries about the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger going out of jail and saying, well, this nowadays is forbidden, but who knows what's going to happen later. So, of course, he was completely right without having studied criminology. Yeah? But this is difficult to...
not in the UK.
Not in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah.
But many things have that were so important at one moment changed. Some of our colleagues also mentioned the demographic composition, for example, of prisons. The kind of persons who were involved in crime in the 70s, also because the societies have changed. And you mentioned Jock Young when he was talking about working class criminology. Probably the word that he's describing does not exist anymore.
Yeah. I mean, in that sense, it is postmodern. I mean, the gig economy, people's sense of place. I mean, I'm very unusual. I've been working in the same university for nearly 48 years, on the staff. But I mean, the nature of people, and my family all live locally, and that's become quite rare. People move out, professional people kind of move out. And I mean, COVID maybe has changed people's preferences, their understanding of their interdependence, etc. And support. That's a hypothesis, which we'll see as other pandemics appear. Yeah, I mean, the nature of class has changed. The nature of the geography of crime, as Dick Hobbs has noted as well, has altered. And of course, those of us like you and me who study cyber a little bit, that we know that people's relationships online and relationships between strangers and collaboration, network collaboration, criminal collaboration between strangers is a much more significant thing nowadays, and how people defend and oppose. So there's research on this, or a little bit of research on this, but there probably should be more how people insulate themselves from risk or fail to do so, and how the police cope or don't with this. These are all quite big issues for contemporary criminology. So I would say, yes, those things have changed. Demographics, we're older, people are getting longer sentences for violence. There's an accumulation of those. If you add terrorism to that, I mean, the prison population has doubled since I came to Cardiff, but not as a result. Yeah, so those kinds of things Yeah, and the Prime Minister's answer to that, the present Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak's answer to that, is that, well, we've obviously got to build more prisons. Other people may disagree, but you can see, yeah, and in a way, the more that particular crimes, as Martin Innes, my colleague, says, you know, the more crimes that become signal crimes, it's harder to give people a lower sentence. You know, anything less than something very severe becomes politically dangerous, undermining social trust. So the more fuss that is made of particular crimes, even including some limited subset of white-collar crimes, like burning Madoff, you know, you could say, well, these are just symbolic hangings, metaphorical hanging. The changes in contemporary penality are also very interesting to study, and certainly drug offenders, you know, are treated differently nowadays.
Yeah, a lot of changes which are interesting to take note. Perhaps we are too close to realize how this has changed. I have also a quick question, because you mentioned at one moment situational crime prevention helped a lot reducing some types of crime. And situational crime prevention is a British invention, let's say. It's Wilkins, who is seldom acknowledged, and then the work of the Home Office with Ron Clark and Patricia Mayhew, who we are going to interview soon. Why do you think there is so much resistance still to the opportunity-based theories?
I think it's partly perhaps a lack of commitment to crime reduction as administrative criminology, in Jock Young's pejorative terminology. Whereas, of course, situational crime prevention approach to green crime might be more popular. Yeah, so it depends on whether you care about the crime. So it's a question of, you know, what we monitor and with what tools. It is an important thought. Hold that thought. So it's seen as being rather, people who've not had their car stolen or their house burgled, or it might be a bit condescending about those things. And so property marking, really, I mean, actually the evidence on property marking is a lot weaker. Street lighting could be, if you're trying to reduce women's fear of crime, could be quite an important thing. Though, of course, if you scream and nobody does anything, then so what? But the growth of CCTV, closed circuit television, is also important. So there's a range of things which people may be more or less sympathetic to. So I think it's seen as tinkering with on the edges, and you don't need many criminologists to look at those issues. So that seems to be specialized. So I have many criticisms of crime science, but it certainly has its place, and I think people are wrong to think of it as unimportant. But you must always also think about, well, where is it not working? What is the role of situational crime prevention in domestic violence? What is the role of situational crime prevention in credit card fraud? Would be quite high because the banks are watching our transactions up to a point. But in corporate fraud, or elite fraud. So I think one of the reasons why situational crime prevention is maybe a little bit looked down on is, first of all, it's not telling you anything about social class. The assumption that the number of willing offenders is a given, it just seems strange. Well, it is strange. But even if the number of willing offenders is not a given, you can still affect the level of offending by situational crime prevention. So for me, as a pragmatist or an empiricist is a negative term, but as an empirical scholar,
Positivist.
Yeah. Oh no. What about negativists? So for me, as an empirically oriented scholar, you have to see the strengths and weaknesses of organized crime. Of situational crime prevention. Ron Clark and other people did contribute to a book on organized crime, situational crime prevention in organized crime, and Klaus von Lampe wrote some work on this, which, in addition to my stuff, I wouldn't fly back economy from Australia in order to attend the conference. Sorry, guys, I just won't do that for anyone. So I didn't contribute to that, but I don't have a problem with situational crime prevention, so long as people, including its sponsors, understand the limits of it. So it was really dealing, it was really not dealing with some quite big areas of crime, and its advocates seldom acknowledge that. So I think that is the that is one issue. So I think, if you say, well, what would situational crime prevention look like for Trump's presidency or for Johnson's controversial, perhaps they weren't parties during COVID? There were plenty of cops standing outside the doors, but what were they looking for? Those are the kinds of lens widening issues that I think are, people. You can look at the strengths of situational crime prevention and try and apply it in different contexts. Say, well, what's the motivation for the watchers? For the capable guardian is a term that is tautological in a sense, because there are many incapable guardians, or capability of guardianship is a linear, not a binary concept. It's a matter of degree. And I think there hasn't been enough conceptual interest in that for my personal taste. These are really good reflections, and then we will have to make shorts of this, because they give you stuff to think about it. I have the impression also that in economic crime, the economic sanctions have also played a major role. Many of the banks they got, but this is, of course, they were imposed mainly by the United States. But this changed completely the way in which these things are dealt with. Now, if you go to a bank here, the first thing they ask you is, do you have the American nationality? The U.S. nationality. America is a continent. It's like, and if you have it, everything gets more complicated. But in any case, it was an economic sanction also that was useful. And in these debates about the length of prison sentences, this is not something that people talk a lot about. What can be done, but this is just a general. I mean, there's also stuff about whether punishing corporations but not individuals really means anything. You could argue, and Peter Reuter and I have done, that the anti-money laundering has certainly had an effect, but what do we know about its effect on the level and organization of criminality? Almost nothing. So people lose, it becomes a Ding an sich, it becomes a thing in itself, a control activity that people don't evaluate the impact of.
I mean, you have written about so many things that it's easy to direct you a little bit to some topics, because there are very, very nice reflections. I was surprised. I mean, you publish a lot of things, Mike. It's difficult. the person who will write your biography, they must start working now, because even a list of all your works would be difficult to establish. And yeah, and I don't agree when you say that your contribution, when you present your contribution as minor. But what would you say is the thing that give you more reward in terms of what you have done as a criminologist? Personal reward, something that made you feel okay, this is something I would like to keep.
Yes, I mean, I've been thinking about, what do I want? What motif do I want on my tombstone? Revise and resubmit. I think, actually, to be honest, my PhD, which became The Phantom Capitalist, because nobody at the time thought of really looking at, well, except Stan Cohen in a different way in Mods and Rockers, but nobody thought about looking at how criminals acquired their skills of bankruptcy fraud, how their careers developed, how business control as well as crime control affected what they were able to do, how the police and the courts dealt with different types of bankruptcy fraud by gangsters or by ordinary business people. That was a radical way of thinking then, and a PhD is the last time most of us have. You're spending 3 years on one thing and no teaching. But the longue durée of the evolution of money laundering control since I first studied it in 1988 after the Brinks-Mat gold bullion robbery, currently being televised on British TV in a rather, let's say, interesting way. As it happens, I bought my wife's wedding ring from one of the shops that John Palmer had in Cardiff, but unfortunately it was before Brinks-Mat, so I don't have the pleasure of knowing that it might have been contained some of that. But so I think, what I'd like to be remembered for, apart from a little bit of humor, is having tried to think through the relationship between why people offend, how they offend, what are the crime scripts that are required to enable them to offend, and how people try and control their behavior, and looking at that as an interactive process along with lawmaking, both in fraud and in money laundering, and in corruption, the evolution of law enforcement or non-evolution in some cases, in combination of those. So I think, I've been lucky. The reason I've written quite a lot of varied stuff is because I'm very interested in a lot of things within an area. But I would hope to be remembered not for the profundity of my theoretical contribution, which I think has been okay, but there are others who've made a bigger contribution. But in finding some areas and grabbing around to make sense of data, of really difficult to get hold of data, particularly in the UK, immersing myself in a semi-ethnographic way in the lives of both offenders and crime controllers, particularly crime controllers in the business world, in the police, etc., and prosecution, and to try and make sense of what Al Rees memorably and rightly called a loose-coupled criminal justice system, and how that operates in different contexts and in different countries. So that I think the comparativism that I'd like to claim some credit for has been a core part of my thinking right from the start. Why is more effort put into white collar crime control in the US than in the UK, for example? so that not all capitalism is the same. So thinking through the interconnection of those things has been a privilege of my life compared to my parents' humble upbringing.
I mean, what you said is really, interesting and touching too at the same time. And it's true that this comparative view changes everything. Many people forget completely, and they talk about, like, I don't know, the debate on the crime drop in the US was so self-centered. And since the beginning, what was there something particular? Well, you have a background also with different countries. What there was something that pushed you towards comparativity, or?
When you're the son of immigrants, but not all children of immigrants are interested in comparativism. Some people remain just interested in Italy, for example, without naming anybody. I cannot. I haven't tried to explain it, but it certainly wasn't anything I inherited from my parents. But my father arrived in England 2 weeks from concentration camp, 2 weeks before the Second World War. At the age of 41, he had to learn English, which when you're deaf, as well as when you're 41, is not easy, and under terrible. So I suppose, even though he never talked much about Germany, it's in your mind that, how different cultures. I mean, in one country, all the Jews were killed, who they could find. In one country, well, we were tolerated, if not positively liked, although we had been expelled from England on occasions. So that immediately makes you, think about, the contingency. So you don't take things for granted. Whereas American, it would be crude just to say parochialism. Many British people, perhaps even Swiss or Belgians, are parochial. We write about stuff that is around us mostly. But I think comparativism is important, because what kind of explanation do you have of something if it's not a comparative explanation? I've always been baffled by that. How can you say you have a complete explanation? Unless, of course, it's a kind of biological, or biological and environment free.
I fully agree, and I think that the background, this plays a role, because sometimes when one is very, very local, I feel la nostalgie de l'infini. The Chirico has this picture that I have here. A friend of mine made it for me, and she offered, and I have it there. But this idea that you cannot be focused only on one thing. You cannot know how things happen if you do not compare. But it's something that comes. I don't know how it is developed. Maybe the origins have something to do. Also, you're very open to languages. Your father talked German to you?
Never.
Yeah.
Eine neue Welt, eine neue Sprache. Yeah, so they didn't speak. My mother was also fluent in German, although she wasn't German. But they never spoke German at home. Just a few words now and again. Yeah, and in those days, people didn't teach German in schools in Britain. They were the enemy.
Exactly.
Still, so we learned French. That was and Latin, but.
And Yiddish, you didn't talk Yiddish in the house?
My father was the real Germans didn't speak. I mean, the Yiddish was for the Central European. The Hochdeutsch was my father didn't speak Yiddish. So he certainly wouldn't have spoken it at home, because the real Germans didn't usually speak in Yiddish. That was the kind of the mobile Central European, Eastern European Jewry language.
Okay.
Yeah, because and my mother also wouldn't have known any Yiddish. I mean, just a few words. Yeah.
Yeah, because many of my friends that immigrated from what is now Poland, Ukraine, they use commonly.
Yeah, Yiddish was the language of the shtetls, the small communities, rural peoples. Yeah, my father was a master tailor in Berlin. He made suits for Max Reinhardt
Wow.
and top officials. You know, he wouldn't have been talking to them in Yiddish.
Yeah. And your mother was also an immigrant. I didn't know that.
My mother was born in England, but she was her parents came from East Prussia, you know, from rural East Prussia, and then they were in Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad. So a good exit, I think. Yeah, why they ended up, I don't know because they're all dead. Why they ended up there, I'm really not sure.
It's a fascinating story, and I mean it gives you such a large background. And I have a question. I'm going a little bit out of what the object of the podcast,
okay.
but just one question. Did you ever met Norbert Elias?
No.
Because I think you would have had a lot in common, Mike, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. I mean, my friends and colleagues here, Gordon Hughes, were taught by Elias, but I wasn't really in that sociological world, and yeah, I didn't really read very much about. I mean, oddly enough, about that kind of sociology or that kind of estrangement. I wasn't so conscious. But don't forget, I'm a bit younger than that. But it is rather ironic that if you take Radzinovitz, Grunhut, and Mannheim, all Jews, the Jewish emigre influence on criminology and sociological criminology has been huge. And I don't know. I don't look for materials. I mean, I haven't tried to retrace my father's family or my mother's family for that matter. I always regarded it, I don't regard it anymore as self-indulgent, but I always thought it was a little indulgent, maybe the existentialist bit of me. But it's a big, it's an interesting question. So I never met Norbert Elias. I doubt he ever heard of me. And it would never have occurred to me to seek him out because without being falsely modest, I never thought I was that important, really, in a way that he was. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's an immigration that changed, as you mentioned, that really had a lot of influence in criminology in the UK, and his contribution, of course, yeah, he was translated maybe too late. But I when I read, I've seen a couple of interviews online, but I don't know. I have the impression that you could have had a very interesting talk because of your general culture, both of you. But
yeah, but I didn't. Maybe the difference was that I had no intellectual culture. You know, apart from what I at school and what I've sort of picked up. My parents, and I made a bit of a thing about this, but my parents were not intellectual at all. My mother was intelligent, and my father was intelligent, but they, apart from reading the Manchester Guardian at home, I never saw them read any kind of heavy books. The people didn't discuss books at home. My dad made a remark that stuck in my mind. I am not a Jew. I am Spinoza. And why the hell he would have come up with that and how he would have come up, I really no idea, which showed more subtlety. But I mean, my father left school at 14. My mother left school at 17. I never saw them read, apart from my mother reading 1 or 2 books about Israel, any serious book ever. Because I have no idea what Elias's background was, but I expect it was more intellectual than that.
Oh, I don't really know what was his
Yeah,
background. But,
I'll ask. Well, we've got a book launch for Gordon Hughes's book on which contains a lot of Elias on Friday. So I'll talk to him about it. But he found Elias was rather severe. I think that he and Norstettler, I can't remember the guy's name, who was also at Leicester. They were really kind of tough hombres, as Stan Cohen was at times. Martin Innes said, who was supervised by Stan, said, so why should anybody be interested in your PhD topic? As his first opening gambit, a bit like Peter Reuter. Peter and I get on well, though. He's also a child of emigres, but of intellectual, professorial emigres. Yeah, so we're opposites in that regard. But but it is an interesting question, and I think it just comes from that because it's stark. And when I was 4, we went to Germany for the first time, and 6. I mean, we couldn't afford foreign holidays, but I went with my mother in a wheelchair. I mean, she had polio when she was 8 months old. She never walked unaided. I mean, really a tough lives. At 8 months, she basically never walked in her life.
your mother?
Without assistance, yeah. So my father was 50 when I was born, and my mother and I went to Germany and Austria, and apparently they told me, I was not aware of it. It was either when I was 4 or when I was 6. Those were the 2 times we went abroad. And there was a GI taking a black guy, a black soldier. I mean, an MP taking a black soldier in handcuffs, and they were waiting for me to make some comment about his color, because in Barrow-in-Furness there were no black people, and I just made no comment at all about his color. I mean, I just never saw it. So that wonderful song in South Pacific about "you've got to be carefully taught to hate," really, I just didn't see the color. I didn't remark about it at all. I think I made some question, but they certainly picked that up as being interesting. Maybe that shows I was not as good a comparativist as I should have been.
Yeah, that's good. When we were in Newark, New Jersey, with my daughter, she was 2, and she was going to a daycare center that was in the premises of the university, or by the side of the university. And you know that Newark, New Jersey is basically African American and Portuguese, Brazilian, the other side. And so most of I think in the daycare center, I think there was one girl who was from Asian American, and Melanie, let's say Caucasian, and the rest were all African American. But Melanie was never surprised also of that. And even the Barbies that you could buy were black Barbies, which I have never seen abroad. But it's interesting because they tell you maybe when they are very small, the kids are afraid of something that is different. But I don't think it's necessarily the color, maybe just the faces that they don't know. But sometimes it comes, if you are exposed since the beginning, then the way you deal with it is different. It's nice to know that. We discussed many times, but I didn't know all these stories, which I find really interesting. So there you are, surrounded now by books, some of them written by
many
you.
of them unread. I think it's osmosis.
Well, I think we cover all the topics that we wanted to cover.
And my voice held out okay. Yeah,
and also many other things that we didn't think before. And I think people understood that we love irony, because it's a very rare commodity nowadays. Irony. And I was thinking Tell me. Yeah.
People have to be brave to be ironic now.
Exactly.
The,
I was thinking if someone hears this, when you mentioned, I was not sure listening, I was laughing. Of course, I know you, I saw your face, but the person who is hearing says, okay, this guy is the worst. He's laughing about that. But yeah, you know how I enjoy discussing, with you. So yeah, I think we must thank you for this time, which was.
well, I've enjoyed it. I mean, obviously talking about oneself is always one's favorite subject, but
Yeah, but
just
we
like
cover both.
Oscar Wilde said, to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance.
I was in Dublin last week and visiting the statue of Oscar Wilde. They have two small monuments by the side with aphorisms. Yeah, really impressive. But we have like two parts of the discussion. One about criminology in general in the UK, and then we cover a lot of things that you didn't cover in the interview that you made for or in the interviews that I have seen that you have done.
Yeah.
So I'm quite happy with this format, even if today we made a very long
Yeah.
one, but nice.
Yeah. I hope I haven't stopped you writing too many books or articles.
We must follow the time, and now people
Yeah.
I think are following more podcasts than books.
Yeah.
Lieven has just published a book.
Uh-huh.
So that is good. You could explain, Lieven.
Yeah, a small book on moral emotions and moral judgments on what's right and wrong and the role of emotions. For example, disgust and anger, shame. Because I have the feeling that emotions are kind of like a neglected topic in criminology.
Yeah.
And
Apart from Suzanne Karstedt and one or two other people like that. Yeah.
But that's just a minority. I mean.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I agree. So is that in English? Who's published it? I'll.
It's a research in brief. It's a summary of a research project I had on Jonathan Haidt's theory of moral foundations.
Okay. Well, I'll look for that because I'm really interested.
And it's also about empathy.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be writing a book I am writing a book, but it's just not very advanced yet, with Judith Van Erp on shaming of corporations and elite individuals. But I think emotions are important. And if you think about penality, then emotions are the core of a lot of penality and police prioritization. I have been challenging Letizia to develop for volume 2, which I upset her at the Authors Meets Critics. I said, I want the second edition of your book to tell me how we translate perceptions of harm into police priorities and sentencing.
That's quite a challenge.
Yeah.
But
yes.
I agree that moral emotions are important in that case as well, because if you think about it, the differential susceptibility to willing to punish people for doing something wrong. I mean, punishment in an evolutionary context has been important. If you look at the writings of all cultural anthropologists, like Christopher Brehm, who writes about how the tendency to punish people who threaten the community has been important in the evolution of societies, from small-scale societies to large-scale anonymous societies like we have nowadays. It's ostracism, which is called labeling now, or social exclusion now, moral anger and moral threats. I mean, I think all these aspects can be incorporated in criminological research as an overarching framework. It combines and it unites, actually, thinking in terms of, I mean, those who think of etiological theories of why people do things which are forbidden by law and why people punish. I mean, if you look at it from a broader anthropological angle, you can explain the same issues by using a larger framework which can be uniting. But that's, of course, it's difficult, but I like thinking in terms of overarching frameworks and it unites people instead of dividing people in schools of thought.
Well, I hope it catches on, but because I can see that might be a topic that people. But I have to say, I found our students are not well prepared for that kind of thinking. But either by us, we almost. It reminds me. I don't read that much, but it reminds me of when I used to read Hermann Hesse, the Glass Bead Game, I think, which is lost. We're almost a high intellectual class for ourselves, but our students are just, whoever we are doing this for, it's generally not our students, except for the rare, the rare ones. So they're just sitting in bafflement, and I'm finding that more depressing.
Yeah, it is.
Than I used to, because when I think of how careful all three of us are in our work, and how refined the judgments and the differences, the nuance that we try to take account of, and I find, unless I'm talking about credit card fraud or scams to my students, which they can identify, or about things like Grenfell Tower catastrophe, they know so little about business world, they know so little about economics, they just cannot engage, and it's a particular problem I have because of my I wouldn't say hyper specialization, but it's hyper specialization in the sense that I know about as much about this as anybody else any other criminologist who is alive. And certainly more than any of those who are dead. Apart from Max Weber. As far as teaching this to students, unless you're doing a whole course, you might as well forget it, because in a couple of gigs, that are not going to be able to make sense of any of this. Now, maybe cybercrime is a little bit different, but I find, money laundering and stuff is just so far away from, the 18 to 22-year-olds. Maybe in Switzerland. I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I just don't think our kids today, they're just used to plucking bits from the internet, maybe doing a minimal amount of the reading that they're supposed to for their seminars, but they don't. I think, and maybe this comes back to childhood thing. I read The Guardian. It was at home as a newspaper, and I still get a newspaper, a physical newspaper. I get the Times. The Guardian is so predictable. You could write the script for any story from a kind of an AI chatbot could write a Guardian piece. But I also read a lot of papers online. But I think the serendipity of when you read a physical paper, you read lots of stuff that you don't ordinarily, that you wouldn't read if you only read it online. No. And I don't think our students, if they look at the BBC News, it's already a lot.
Yeah, I have seen the changes, because at the beginning our now we have a master, but historically it was a postgraduate degree. So you had people that had already finished 5 years of study, and then it is quite different. And also I think, I think this is a tradition that comes from the Bible, but I cannot remember from which part. But the Mormons, for example, they have to go 2 years abroad when they reach 18. Without seeing the family. And I'm sure that this comes from some part of the Bible, which I don't remember now. But this idea of going abroad and living and getting some real world experience changes a lot the way of thinking. And now I think it's a little bit more very scholarly oriented. So you do a primary school, secondary, high school, then you do the undergrad, the graduate, and everything is like, well, you must do that. And maybe this is what is not working. The contact with the real.
Well, they do part-time jobs, but they're not necessarily mind-broadening. Like, although I have to say, having watched the musical The Book of Mormon, it didn't necessarily lead to broad-mindedness. But I think it's also the mass higher education. When I was a student, 10% of people went to university. When obviously Oxford and Cambridge were a smaller percentage of the population. So nowadays you have people who can play the game and get in good enough scores. They don't feel privileged. I mean, as an undergraduate, I didn't feel that privileged. I didn't work that hard. I wasn't that interested. There isn't that much buzz, and teaching the more refined areas of the things that we work on is and what I need to learn, if I'm not just going to quit altogether, is just to do things that really ignorant people can learn. So conceptual stuff like emotions, maybe that people you can find ways of teaching that, but stuff that requires political context. I mean, before this, I was listening to a Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island was talking about the transatlantic movement on illicit finance. Yeah, the difference. Even when I was at school, I actually won the Hansard Society Prize for an essay on the differences between US and British governance. About the diffusion of centers of power in America, which of course makes it ungovernable, whereas the concentration in the UK, it hadn't occurred to me to put in for the Hansard Society Prize, but somebody said, well, so that kind of thing, you don't find that many motivated people kind of doing that. But I didn't do it because I was particularly hardworking. I was really interested in the question, and so when I came in regulating fraud to write about, why the Americans put a lot more effort. I remember Richard, criminologist, writes about blue collar crime, and I'd written regulating fraud, and he said, I thought it was a great book, Mike, but how come that Bill Chambliss is quoted on the back as saying this is a kind of brilliant pioneering book, when in the chapter that deals with criminalization, you've destroyed everything he stands for. And my response was that, well, Bill's a pal of mine. We're happy drinking together, and I wouldn't guarantee that he'd read every word of the book. Yeah, but I did, and that's what meant that I could never be a Marxist. Although it's very trendy to be in that era.
Again.
Because there were what would now be called varieties of capitalism. Yeah, and Gramsci enabled people to reconcile empirical complexity with an emotional commitment to Marxism by talking about the relative autonomy of ideology, and so it always interested why people believe things as an agnostic. As a determined agnostic, in spite of, or perhaps because of, having gone to an Orthodox Jewish school, boarding school for 4 years, and having classical Hebrew O-level as a result, that I would not otherwise have done that. As a professional and determined agnostic, I could never really believe. I was interested in why people believe, but I couldn't believe in things myself, and maybe that's protected me from.
A little bit like Woody Allen, I think it's Hannah and her sisters, when he goes to the different religions, trying to believe. I want to believe. Also, Unamuno, the Spanish philosopher, he was saying, I would love to believe, but I have read too much. So the guy is desperate for believing, but he cannot reach it. And this works like religion. Some ideas, I saw a book, The Woke Religion, just published, and they work a little bit like religions, and maybe it's because religion plays a minor role that people need other common beliefs. I don't know.
But Argentina's football success is a religion for you.
That's also
but fortunately, it's not a religion that occupies every day.
Exactly.
Or wins every day.
Exactly. But it unified. A country that was divided, it can last maybe 1 month or something like that. It unifies for some time, until there's a match lost, and then they start criticizing again. But
I will be interested if Ukraine has less corruption now than before. That's an interesting comparative question.
Yeah, it's true. We have to follow this.
Whether it's forged a nation in the proper sense of forged, or whether it's just a forgery. But anyway, I look forward to reading your book, your think piece, Lieven.
I sent it with pleasure. It's the beginning of another topic I want to explore. I mean, you need to broaden the horizon once in a while. And I really do enjoy this. So I sent you a copy.
Well, I mean, you and Marcelo, you are real people who are kind of thinking a lot and broadening a lot. And I think that's great. There are not that many people that I would put in that category. And one of the reasons why Farrington fell out so badly with me, he'd barely spoken to me since. The only other conversations I've had with him since that, she's given me good citations, were once when we were in LA on the way to and he and Ellen were doing another iteration, and I leant over and I started to say something, and she said, "We know what you think." And the other time was when we were both having a pee before I got the Selling Wolfgang Award, and we both happened to be having a pee, and he was getting whatever the last award that he didn't have was, and he said, "Oh, I got that in 1984." He said, and I thought of saying, but I actually didn't. There must have been a lot less competition around for the international thing. But instead I said that was a very good year, and he didn't get the irony of the Orwell.
When I was 17.
I was listening to Janice Ian's When I Was 17. Do you know that song?
Yeah.
17, I learned a lot.
Maybe you mentioned that to me once. Because I mean, if we are something, it's because we learn from the best. And one of the goals of the podcast is also to share a little bit that, because these kind of discussions, it's very difficult to have them. Even when we meet in a conference, sometimes we don't have the time.
No, we don't.
And there are so many things that can be learned, with a good conversation. So it's also something for the generations to come, how things were done. I would love to see Sutherland, for example, discussing with someone in a relaxed environment. But of course, that's
maybe
impossible.
we can have a virtual, an avatar, a Sutherland avatar.
An avatar.
Let's see what Chat GPI will do for Sutherland.
They may be able to put together all what he wrote. The problem is which Sutherland you get, the one that he was at 30 or 35, or the one that he was at 50. Sometimes one changes so much during life.
Some people do, not everybody.
Some people reject, and some people do not admit that they have changed, and they keep the ideas. The big thinkers, you can see how they change their mind sometimes, I think. Okay. So
it was really a real pleasure to talk, and you have some editing to do to boil this down to 5 minutes.
We will never do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, then we will surely then have some shorts taken just to push people to hear the full conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, in the car when you go there, you're caught in a jam in the traffic.
Yeah.
What can you do better than listen to Mike Levi? I didn't mention anything about the pronunciation of the name. I didn't make my joke about the gene Levi.
Yeah. Well, my father would have said Levi, of course, and Italians still say primo. Yeah,
Primo.
Because the only Levi they know is primo.
Yeah, and you have it there by your side. I can see it to your left.
Yes, this was a gift from Letizia. So I'm primos inter pares.
Okay, Mike. Thank you very, very much.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Gujot. Your hosts are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Evi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.